2018 has been big for old games generally.
What's
There's
wrong?
been several big
Well, I have nothing on
remasters,
me that I
ports
can
and
give you.
compilations, not to mention recent games that have received substantial updates throughout the year. I've
owe me
played
for
stuff in
this.
other formats too, since the start of the year was relatively dry in terms of new releases, but I'm not going to focus on that this time.
How's
It'd be a
this?
little redundant for me to start going on about Hebreki, Shenmue or Dig Dug again.
Wow.
There's too much that was new to me. With that in mind, let's go into some of my highlights. It's really weird to me that some people are dismissive of this. I'm used to buying one Street Fighter game for 40 quid. This gives me 12, including the incredible Third Strike, and I can play them 2-player anywhere. Maybe it doesn't have all the features and characters from the console versions, with Alpha 3 feeling particularly weird without some additions that become standard in home releases, but it's a tiny trade-off for such a ridiculous bundle. You also get to play the original Street Fighter, which is a genuinely funny Kusoge classic. There's also some brilliant museum features that delve into the full history of the series, rare artwork, every music track from each game, and the ability to view each frame of every character's animation throughout each of the 4 sub-series on offer. The ability to play Street Fighter 3 Double Impact in native widescreen is a particular highlight. I can't believe this is a debatable opinion, but this is a high watermark for compilation games. One of my biggest pet peeves is the retconning of the UK games industry. This has nothing to do with patriotism. It's about how the scene has abandoned its roots in the old home computer games and magazines, and now it's all about following America. All the Mega Drive patters about Genesis does what Nintendo don't, and blast processing. When's the last time you heard somebody talk about Cyber Razor cuts? Doesn't happen. That's why I found revisiting Tomb Raider 2 so refreshing. Let's not forget that this is the magnum opus of the team who brought us Rick Dangerous and Chuck Rock. Play it for 5 minutes and you'll realise that. The haphazard placement of traps and tigers, the increasingly apparent weirdness of the original Lara Croft character, and the subtly dark humour that runs through each perilous encounter and shocking death. It's pure Amiga stuff. Coming back to it now, it's also quite jarring to see how ambitious it is. Working with dynamic camera cuts and complex 3D environmental design, pre-NGS and pre-Ocarina of Time. People dismiss these games for their finicky controls, but those are the same guys who call Flashback unplayable. Don't listen to them. Tomb Raider 2 ought to be held up as both a classic PlayStation title and a fascinating window into a largely forgotten bit of gaming's history. If you're still into this stuff and you spent much of the 90s playing ambitious new games and dreaming of the next big innovation, I don't think anything will take you back quite like this. Yep, everyone was right. It's really good. Pretty funny, original ideas, great music, tangible ennui, and I've managed to avoid most of the spoilers going in. I don't really want to say more, and I've only captured 30 seconds of footage, so I'll leave it there. I've finished one Zelda game for the first time every year since around 2011, and I'm not prepared to break the tradition yet. In 2018, thanks to the NES games bundled with the Switch Online subscriptions, it was time for Zelda 1. Now, Zelda 1 was designed for a different era of games audiences. It was supposed to be a rare big game that you'd play over weeks or months, because there wasn't anything more exciting to do at home in the 80s. There's ridiculous difficulty spikes, obtuse puzzles, and unhelpful localization. Paired with save states and easy access to a walkthrough, something that most people who completed it on its original release likely used too, and you can still have a really good time with it. It's often said how Breath of the Wild fulfills the vision of the original Zelda, but that works both ways. Zelda 1's the closest thing to Breath of the Wild within the rest of the series. The open design is a really fun thing to work within once you've got a solid grasp of the overworld, and the simple gameplay makes the whole thing feel quite punchy and satisfying. It's fun to see how much of the series' ideas were first introduced here, and it's often quite funny when the game does something really out of step with the series that followed. As much of a fan of the series as I am, a lot of it was a real surprise to me. If you've been putting it off for years, I'd encourage you to give it a go now that you can play it whenever and wherever you like. There's a lot of hype going into this one, but it kind of seemed to peter out upon release. Almost as if it doesn't matter how radically you overhaul the game's visuals if it's still an old PS2 game. It's an odd bit of work breaking out of the Team Eco art style. There's a chance I'd even be annoyed about the game if we hadn't already got a perfectly good, true-to-source HD remaster of Shadow of the Colossus on the PS3. I still enjoyed this though. Standing in its own light, this is an attractive game, And the idea of seeing a more realistic interpretation of the game's vast environment and towering enemies isn't entirely without merit. I don't think it's successful in creating a more mainstream version of an art house darling, since control and collision issues are still present. Shadow of the Colossus isn't a fun boss rush game, it's not an empowerment fantasy, it's bleak, punishing and scrappy. It's purposefully inelegant, and whether or not it was Blue Point's intention, that still shines through. The game's around a tenner now, and if you're a big fan of the original, you might enjoy seeing a different interpretation. Whether or not they sit comfortably alongside Eco and The Last Guardian, the new landscapes are still beautiful. I don't hear anybody going on about this, so I think it's slipped under most people's radar. A wee, twitchy, accurate little platforming challenge that's choking with content. It's a modest release and a really good compliment to the Switch. If you enjoyed Celeste but thought people made too big a deal out of it because of its story, this might be more your thing. I'll try not to take too long, I already talked about Splatoon enough. The game has taken massive strides in the last year though. Each Splatfest brings a new shifty station, each more experimental than the last. New maps, weapons, music and revisions have fleshed out the rest of the year to the point where I'm not sure whether I'd still say Splatoon 1 was my favourite. I mean, Camp Triggerfish is both in now, so what's the difference? They also put Cali in the story mode's hub world, which feels like the proper closure of the Squid Sisters stories that I've been longing for. There are still some big memorable maps that remain exclusive to the first game, but I'd argue that that's a good thing. It seems that Nintendo stepped away from the spectre of the Wii U and let Splatoon 2 grow as a proper sequel rather than an expansion of the game that had a limited audience. I think that's what much of the team were shooting for in the first place, what with Off the Hook and everything. I'm glad to have Splatoon 1 be remembered for its own quality rather than as a prototype to the Switch game. Salmon Run's been expanded too, with its best map yet, and one that reflects the aspects of level design that were experimented with in the new shifty stations. I'm really thrilled with how the game continues to evolve, and I'm eager to see how its developers will work with everything they've learned as they move on to the inevitable Splatoon 3. It happened! I finally got into Dark Souls, and I have the Switch to thank for that. Souls games don't work with me on traditional consoles. I started Bloodborne when it was up on PlayStation Plus, and though I was surprised I've enjoyed it as much as I did, there was no way I was going to stick with the game on PlayStation 4. Playing a PS4 game means a lot in time to it. Sitting down for an hour or two and walking away time after time making no tangible progress was not for me. I tried back when Demon's Souls was import only and got severely burned by the experience. The ability to play one of these games whenever I wanted completely turned the tables. I'd dig further in little by little and sometimes find myself playing for hours. I just mentioned how the Switch got me through Zelda 1 and Dark Souls worked exactly the same for me. I've really been enjoying it like that. I want to be careful how I talk about the game though, remembering all the rhetoric that put me off. Firstly, Dark Souls isn't all grim, serious, high fantasy stuff. I was really happy to find out how much of the game's weirdness struck a chord with me. Seeing a big helpful crow and a fat onion boy who sounded like Winnie the Pooh made me really happy to sink into a world that I pegged as joyless. It made me really appreciate the big monsters and nastiness. Dark Souls is a tough game, but it always gives you options. I've often come up against something that's made me want to give up, but going back and exploring other areas often led to following entirely new, more fruitful paths, making me strong enough to stand a chance against what I'd been avoiding. All that get good patter ignores the fact that try something else is often the better option. Crucially, I found that you can enjoy Dark Souls without buying into all of it. There's a lot of the game that I either don't care about or I'm not interested in, and it hasn't prevented me from enjoying the rest of it on my level. I can appreciate how much people like the game, but given how people either seem to think it's their favourite thing by miles, or they're not interested in it at all, I assumed it was a very divisive thing. Any sign of something I wasn't into meant the whole thing wasn't for me. That's not the case. You can be a Dark Souls player who's only sticking with it until there's a new Mario or something. It works. You don't have to give a shit. If I had to give something an Old Game of the Year award, it'd probably be Dark Souls for how big a deal getting into it has been for me. But I think it's important for me to avoid hyperbole when discussing it, so fuck it. There's no award this year. Enjoy your nothing, critically beloved game.